The date is April 9th, 1941. A convoy of American destroyers cuts through the icy waters off the coast of Greenland. They are not there to fight the Nazis. They are there to protect a balance sheet. The world believes this island is a frozen wasteland, a white void on the map where nobody lives and nothing matters. That belief is a lie. Greenland is not empty. It is a vault. And the United States is about to stake its claim on the most valuable ledger entry of the 21st century. We are told that nations rise and fall on the battlefield. We are told that wars are won by soldiers and generals. But the truth is simpler and more brutal. Nations do not collapse because they run out of bullets. They collapse because they run out of cash. And in the cold arithmetic of geopolitics, Greenland is not a romantic frontier. It is a commodity. It is not about the ice. It is about what is buried beneath the ice. At first glance, Greenland appears to be the definition of irrelevance. It is the largest island on Earth, yet only 56,000 people call it home. That is fewer people than a sold-out college football stadium spread across a landmass 3 times the size of Texas. The capital, Nuuk, has a population smaller than a mid-sized American suburb. For centuries it was dismissed as a land of fishing villages and seal hunters, a place where time moved slowly and history barely touched. But beneath the surface the foundation was rotting. Or rather, it was glowing. The ice sheet that has covered Greenland for millions of years is melting, and as it melts, it is revealing something that the accountants and the generals have been waiting for. A treasure map written in the language of the periodic table. Greenland is not a wasteland. It is a deposit box, and what it contains is the raw material of the future. The 21st century is not built on coal and steel. It is built on 17 chemical elements known as rare earth metals. These are the vitamins of modern civilization. Without them, your phone is a paperweight. Without them, your electric car is a sculpture. Without them, the F-35 fighter jet is an expensive monument to hubris. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, europium. These are not the names of distant planets. They are the names of the invisible sinews that hold the modern world together. And for the last 30 years, the United States has been asleep while a rival power built a monopoly on these elements. That rival is China. Today, China controls roughly 90% of the global processing of rare earth elements. They do not just mine the ore. They refine it. They process it. They control the entire supply chain from the rock to the magnet to the motor. This is not an accident. This is strategy. And it is a noose around the neck of the American military. If Beijing decided tomorrow to turn off the tap, the consequences would be immediate and catastrophic. The assembly lines in Detroit would freeze. The fighter jets in Nevada would sit grounded. The wind turbines in Texas would stop spinning. The silicon chips that power everything from missiles to medical devices would vanish from the market. This is the nightmare that keeps the strategists at the Pentagon awake at night. This is the addiction. The trap was set decades ago. In the 1990s, China made a calculated bet. They kept the price of rare earth minerals artificially low. They flooded the market with cheap supply. They subsidized their mines and ignored environmental regulations. The result was predictable. Mines in the United States and Australia could not compete. They shut down one by one. The Mountain Pass mine in California, which once supplied the world, closed its doors in the early 2000s. The competition was dead. The monopoly was complete. And then China showed the world what a monopoly looks like. In 2010, a Chinese fishing trawler collided with Japanese Coast Guard vessels near the disputed Senkaku Islands. Japan arrested the Chinese captain. Beijing did not send warships. They did not issue threats. They simply stopped exporting rare earth metals to Japan. The effect was instant. Toyota could not build cars. Panasonic could not build batteries. The Japanese economy was brought to its knees without a single shot being fired. Japan released the captain. The lesson was learned. The rare earth supply chain is a weapon. This is the moment the Pentagon woke up. They realized they had allowed a fatal vulnerability to develop. They started looking for alternatives. They looked at Australia. They looked at Vietnam. They looked at Kazakhstan. But none of them had the scale or the concentration of one specific location. A remote mountain in southern Greenland called Kvanefjeld. This site sits on top of what geologists believe to be the largest deposit of rare earth elements in the world. It is the Saudi Arabia of the future. The country that controls Kvanefjeld controls the thermostat of the global technology market. This is why the United States offered to buy Greenland in 2019. The world laughed. The internet exploded with memes. Late-night comedians made jokes about Trump Tower overlooking glaciers. The Prime Minister of Denmark called the idea absurd. But in the Situation rooms of Washington, nobody was laughing. They understood what the public did not. The offer was not a whim. It was a foreclosure notice. To understand the stakes, you have to understand what is inside the rock. The deposit at Kvanefjeld is part of a geological formation called the Illimansak complex. It is a freak of nature. The rock contains concentrations of neodymium and dysprosium found nowhere else on Earth in such volumes. Neodymium is the key to supermagnets. Before neodymium, magnets were heavy and weak. With neodymium, you can create a magnet the size of a coin that can lift a bowling ball. Why does this matter? Because motors. Every electric motor works on magnetism. If you have powerful lightweight magnets, you can build powerful lightweight motors. This is the secret sauce of the electric vehicle revolution. You cannot build a Tesla without neodymium. You cannot build a wind turbine without it. The vibration motor in your phone, the speaker in your laptop, the hard drive in your computer. All of them rely on these magnets. This is not luxury. This is infrastructure. Then there is dysprosium. Neodymium magnets have a fatal flaw. They lose their magnetism at high temperatures. If an engine gets too hot, the magnet dies. Dysprosium is the magic ingredient that fixes this. You add a small amount of dysprosium, and the magnet becomes heat-resistant. This is critical for military applications. A missile guidance system operates at extreme heat. A jet engine turbine operates at extreme heat. Without dysprosium, the weapon fails. Currently, the United States relies on China for almost all of its processed dysprosium. Let that number sink in. The dependency is staggering. An F-35 fighter jet contains nearly 1,000 pounds of rare earth materials. The targeting lasers, the radar arrays, the communication equipment, the stealth coating, all of them require these elements. The electric actuators that move the flaps on the wings use neodymium magnets. Without these elements, the F-35 is a very expensive paperweight. The U.S. Navy is building ships that rely on components that can only be sourced from its greatest strategic rival. It is a level of vulnerability that makes the oil crisis of the 1970s look like a minor inconvenience. The Chinese government is well aware of this leverage. In 1992, the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping famously said, "The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths." He knew exactly what he was building. He understood that the future would not be decided by oil fields. It would be decided by the periodic table, and he positioned China to be the OPEC of the 21st century. This is the antagonist, not a general, not a politician, a market force backed by state power. The strategy is called Made in China 2025. The goal is to dominate the high-tech industries of the future. China does not just want to sell the raw minerals. They want to sell the finished batteries. They want to sell the finished electric cars. They want to sell the finished robots. They want to move up the value chain. To do that, they need to control the raw materials. Kvanefjeld is the only rock big enough to stand in their way. But getting the minerals out of the ground is not just a matter of digging. It is a matter of politics. And this is where the story gets complicated. Greenland is a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Nuuk handles domestic affairs. Copenhagen handles foreign policy and defense. But the ownership of mineral resources belongs to the Greenlandic people. For years, a fierce debate has raged in Greenland about whether to mine Kvanefjeld. The issue is uranium. The rare earth minerals at Kvanefjeld are mixed together with uranium and thorium. To get the rare earths, you have to dig up the uranium. For a country with a pristine environment and a culture based on fishing and hunting, the idea of an open-pit uranium mine is terrifying. The wind in southern Greenland screams down from the ice sheet at 100 miles an hour. If radioactive dust blows over the town of Narsak, the sheep will be poisoned. The fish will be poisoned. The people will be poisoned. This internal conflict in Greenland became a proxy war for global powers. On one side, you had the environmentalists and the local Inuit communities who feared radioactive dust and the pollution of their fjords. On the other side, you had the pro-independence faction. Many Greenlanders dream of full independence from Denmark. Currently, Denmark subsidizes the Greenlandic economy with a block grant of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Without that money, Greenland would go bankrupt. The pro-mining faction argued that the only way to achieve financial independence was to sell the minerals. Sovereignty is solvency. Into this delicate local debate stepped the Chinese. A Chinese company called Shen Resources bought a stake in the Australian company that held the license to mine Kvanefjeld. This set off alarm bells in Washington. It looked like China was about to do to Greenland what it had done to Africa. Buy the infrastructure, bribe the elite, lock up the resources. If a Chinese-influenced company controlled Kvanefjeld, the Chinese monopoly would remain intact. They would simply own the alternative supply as well. This was the context of Donald Trump's offer. It was a clumsy signal that the United States would not let Greenland fall into Beijing's orbit. The State Department opened a consulate in Nuuk for the first time in decades. They started offering aid packages. They sent high-level delegations to court the Greenlandic government. It was a charm offensive designed to counter Chinese influence. But the Russians were also watching. As the ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up in the Arctic. The northern sea route along the coast of Russia cuts the travel time between Europe and Asia by 40% compared to the Suez Canal. Greenland sits at the gateway to these new lanes. Russia has been militarizing its Arctic coast. They are building new bases and refurbishing old Soviet ones. They see the Arctic as their future economic engine. So you have three superpowers circling this island of 56,000 people. You have the environmental tragedy of the melting ice revealing the economic prize of the century. And you have a local population caught in the middle. The local dispute exploded into a national crisis in April of 2021. The government of Greenland called a snap election. The entire election was fought on a single issue, the mine. The pro-mining party argued that the mine was the golden ticket. They argued that the Chinese investment would bring infrastructure, airports, and money. They played on the dream of a Greenlandic republic, free from Danish control. But the opposition party ran on a platform of zero tolerance for uranium mining. They argued that the health of the ancestors and the land was worth more than money. The world watched this election closely. In Washington and Beijing, diplomats held their breath. The result was a shock. The anti-mining party won in a landslide. One of their first acts was to ban uranium mining. This effectively killed the Kvanefjeld project in its current form. Washington breathed a sigh of relief. The immediate threat of a Chinese-controlled uranium mine was gone, but the problem remained. The rare earths were still in the ground, and the West still needed them. This brings us to the smoking gun moment. The moment the financial reality became undeniable. The Pentagon released a report in 2022 that classified rare earth elements as critical to national security. They committed direct funding to mining companies. They signed contracts to guarantee they would buy the minerals regardless of the price. They were treating the mining industry like the defense industry. It was no longer a free market. It was a matter of survival. This was the foreclosure notice. The plan is to create a supply chain that bypasses China completely, mine the rocks in Greenland, ship them to processing plants in the United States or Canada, turn them into magnets in factories in the West. It is a strategy of total decoupling. But building a supply chain from scratch is incredibly difficult. Processing rare earths is a dirty, complex business. You have to separate 17 different elements that are chemically almost identical. It requires massive amounts of acid and heat. It produces toxic waste. For 30 years, the West was happy to let China do the dirty work. We exported the pollution and imported the cheap magnets. Now we have to learn how to do the dirty work ourselves. And we have to do it in a way that meets strict environmental standards. The cost is astronomical. A rare earth processing plant can cost $1 billion to build. Private investors are wary. They know that if they spend the money, China can simply flood the market, drop the price, and bankrupt them just like they did in the 90s. This is why the military is getting involved. The Department of Defense is investing direct capital into rare earth mining companies. They are underwriting the risk. They are guaranteeing the demand. This is not capitalism. This is state-sponsored industrial policy. It is the only way to break the monopoly. The stakes are too high to leave it to the market. Think about the scale of that. The most powerful military on Earth is now in the mining business. While the lawyers and geologists fight over the rocks, the military is preparing for the physical reality of a contested Arctic. Thule Air Base, now called Pichafik Space Base, is being upgraded. It is no longer just about watching for Soviet bombers. It is about space dominance and missile defense. Russia has developed hypersonic missiles, weapons that fly at 5 times the speed of sound and can maneuver in flight. These weapons threaten to make traditional radar obsolete. The Arctic is the most likely trajectory for a hypersonic strike against America. Greenland is the only place where sensors can be placed to track these threats in time. The United States is investing billions to upgrade the eyes and ears of the North. They are deploying advanced radar systems. They are building satellite ground stations. They are training personnel to operate in sub-zero conditions. The U.S. Navy has reactivated its Second Fleet, which is responsible for the North Atlantic. They are sending submarines under the Arctic ice to shadow Russian movements. The Arctic is becoming a theater of war again. And then there is the Polar Silk Road. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state. This is a made-up term with no basis in international law, but it signals their intent. China wants to use the Arctic shipping lanes to move goods to Europe. They are building icebreakers. They are the only country other than Russia building nuclear-powered icebreakers. They want to integrate Greenland into their Belt and Road Initiative. They offered to build 3 international airports in Greenland. The price tag was small for China, but massive for Greenland. It would have handed Beijing control of Greenland's transportation arteries. Under intense pressure from Washington, Denmark stepped in and paid for the airports itself, blocking a familiar pattern of debt trap diplomacy China has used from Sri Lanka to Africa. The talk of buying Greenland was never about real estate. It was about influence. The United States cannot purchase the island, but it can purchase alignment through money, education, tourism, and presence in nuke. Greenlanders understand this leverage. They welcome American attention, but they refuse to become anyone's pawn. Sitting atop vast mineral wealth, they are using superpower rivalry to demand greater autonomy from Denmark and to write their own foreign policy. This is not a shooting war. It is a strategic default. For decades, the U.S. outsourced its supply chains to China, hollowing out its industry in exchange for cheap imports. Now the bill is due in lost time, lost sovereignty, and billions spent rebuilding what was abandoned. As the ice melts, Greenland becomes central to the 21st century economy. Zinc, gold, rubies, and above all, rare earths. Imagine an electric car powered by magnets mined in Greenland, refined in Texas, assembled in Detroit. That is the vision Washington is fighting for. The alternative is dependence or decline. The battle for Greenland is not coming. It is already here, fought with policy, pressure, and ledgers written in rare earths. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, if you want to understand the economic forces that shape history before the history books are written, subscribe to this channel now. Because while the world laughs at headlines, we are reading the balance sheets. And the balance sheets never lie. This is the story of Greenland. This is the story of the future. And this is the story of why empires do not fall on the battlefield. They fall on the ledger. The ice is melting. The vault is opening. And the world is watching.